Hello, and welcome to today's lesson. We're going to code the first half of our website's content. Before we start coding the content, we have to finish the header, particularly the search box. First, I'll paste a form element under the code of the navigation. The pasted element includes a text box and a submit button. Both of these are created by the input element. When we view the website in a browser, we can see that the form doesn't look very good. We'll have to use CSS again. I'll switch to the style sheet and paste a corresponding block of code. I'm using the header content identifier, so the CSS rules will affect only the form in the header. The float property is set to right to ensure the form displays in the correct place. The remaining properties define the background, size, padding, and border radius. The background picture was captured in the same way as the one in the header, by using the crop tool in Photoshop. After we refresh the website, we'll see that the form matches the graphic design. We're now ready to start coding the content part. Once again, we'll start by preparing the right background. Here in the picture, you can see that the background consists of a gray gradient, a separator, and another gradient. The background is made up of several layers. It's okay to create only a small crop and save the file like we did in the header. Let's use the image in our website. Switch to Code Editor and enclose the whole header into another div element. The identifier is set to page. This element will wrap around the whole layout. Next, I'll switch to the style sheet and insert a corresponding code. The background uses the image we have just exported from Photoshop. What's crucial here is the background position property. This property moves the background down 60 pixels. It's 60 pixels because that is the exact height of the header. By moving the background, we ensure that the elements won't optically overlap each other. When we refresh the website, we can see that everything is working well. The background is again set to stretch through the whole screen width. However, the content itself is still limited by 960 pixels width. Therefore, I'll create a div element under the header and add a content wrapper identifier. This is where the whole content section will be located. Next, I'll add a corresponding selector into the style sheet. The width is set to 960 pixels. The margin property is set to 0 auto to ensure that the content will be centered. The basic layout is finished, so let's begin to create the actual content. We'll start with the photography section. You may be surprised that this section is created by only 2 elements. I'll paste both elements into the code. You can see that it's one div element with a photo identifier and an H1 heading. If you're wondering how this works, it may be helpful to look at the CSS code. The wrapper div has the exact size of the used photography. It's important to realize that we have to add the shadow, which extends the image vertically. The photography itself is set as a background image. The H1 element is styled exactly to fit the bottom left corner. You're already familiar with each individual property, so we don't need to discuss that any further. Let's refresh the website in a browser and take a look at the result. Right under the photography, we're going to create the section with a sentence and 2 buttons. We'll also use an easy trick to create the dotted separator. I'll switch to Code Editor and insert a div element with buttons identifier. Notice the H2 element that contains a short sentence. Viewing the site in a browser, we can see that there is a lot of work still to be done. I'll switch to the style sheet and paste another block of code. The buttons identifier selector only styles the wrapper div. Focus on the border bottom property. This property sets the bottom border of the whole box. The value is set to dotted, which makes the border actually look dotted. The button's H2 identifier selector only sets the formatting and position of the sentence. Now, when we view the website in a browser, we can see a much better result. Now it's time to create the buttons. They're created by 2 span elements with a button class attached. Notice the links inside the span elements. Let's define how the buttons will look. I'll switch to the style sheet and paste the button class selector together with some properties. Again, a button's background consists of an image exported from Photoshop. If we look at how the buttons appear in a browser, it's obvious that we're not finished yet. The links are placed incorrectly and the link surface doesn't cover the whole button. We can easily solve these problems by adding a Button A selector into the style sheet. We'll set the display property to block so we can set the size of the link. Also, use the margin and text align properties to center the text inside the button. Let's view the result in a browser. Thanks to a well-set size, the link surface stretched over the whole button and the text is centered nicely. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time.